Hello, today's topic is the nervous system. The nervous system. So, and that includes all of your nerves, it includes all of your hormones, all of your glands, it includes the parts of the neuron. And this is so if you combine this with the brain, then you get about 9% of the entire multiple choice section of the AP exam. Now, that's multiple choice, that's not the FRQ portion, but you get my point. So, biology is a big chapter here. So, let's go ahead and let's get started here. Okay, so let's take a look at the neuron. Your brain is made of neurons. Your nerves, all over your body, are made of neurons. But being a psychology class, we tend to think of the brain. But remember, psychology is the study of how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. And your neurons in your legs and in your stomach all make you feel a certain way. So do your hormones. I mean, come on, we all know hormones make us feel certain ways. Okay, hit pause or hit the space bar and copy this down. This is a lot of information, including the bottom here. This is a neuron. Okay, so let's go start on the left and go right. So we've got the cell body is called the soma. Now, the word soma shows up in other forms too. In the mental disorders chapters, we have what are called somatoform disorders, diseases of the body. Soma means body. Okay? And so what happens, and then also, I mean, I'm going to have to say this several times, all right? Maybe, I don't know. I'm going to have to say this several times to really get the picture down. These are called dendrites. Now, the word dendra is Greek for tree. So notice that dendrites kind of look like trees. Now, keep in mind that this is just a diagram, but a neuron can have over 10,000 dendrites in one neuron. And neurons are like microscopic, they are very tiny. There are billions and billions of neurons in your brain and in your nerves. And each one of these neurons can have over 10,000 dendrites that communicate with other neurons. It's extremely complicated. So what happens is that dendrites receive neurotransmitters from other neurons. Now, what do I mean by a neurotransmitter? Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers such as dopamine, such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, endorphins. Okay, those are neurotransmitters. They are chemicals that swim between the neurons. So dendrites will receive these neurotransmitters. And if it receives enough neurotransmitter from another neuron, then the soma is going to decide to fire, kind of like a gun. It gets enough pressure. The soma decides to fire and shoots down the gun barrel. Think of this as a gun barrel. This gun barrel is called an axon. The axon, not only do I want you to think of the axon as like a gun barrel, think of it as a copper electric wire. So the axon, think of it as the spine or the main message way which messages will be sent down this spine. Now, just like a spine, or just like a copper wire, it's going to be covered by an insulator. Electric wires do have a protective coating. In this case, we're going to call that the myelin sheath. Now, a sheath is what you keep your sword in. It's like a protective covering like on your belt buckle, you stick your sword in there. That's called a sheath. In this case, this myelin sheath, not only does it protect the axon, but it insulates it and it helps speed the neural impulses. Notice that neural impulse, you see this arrow here? Shoots down the axon. Now, so once the neuron shoots down this axon, then here, this is the axon terminals. These are called the axon terminals. And at the tip, you get what are called buttons, sometimes called terminal buttons. And what these buttons will do is they will squirt neurotransmitters to other neurons. So imagine you have like 10,000 buttons, and then they're shooting neurotransmitters at 10,000 other neurons. You can see how this is very complicated. And it is. Now, I do think it's especially important to know the difference between terminal buttons and dendrites. So I've got something, and I want you to try this. Buttons give, and the dendrites receive. Boys give, and the dames or the damas receive. Okay, so think about boys give flowers, and the dames, the girls, receive the flowers. Okay, so buttons squirt neurotransmitters, and the dendrites receive the neurotransmitters. Now, I want you to know something else about neurons. They do not touch each other. In between, I know that's crazy, billions of neurons in your brain, none of them touch each other. They do not touch each other. There is a space, it's microscopic, but there is a space between the neurons called the synaptic cleft, also called the synapse. Okay? A synapse is a gap between the neurons where neurotransmitters, I imagine them swimming like sperm. You know, they're out there floating. I don't know. It's not exactly like that, but all this is microscopic. Okay, so the dendrites receive the neurotransmitters from other neurons, from other buttons of other neurons. If they receive enough stimulation, then the soma will receive the information and then decide to fire down the axon. The axon is kind of like the copper wiring of an electric wire. It's like the spine. And the myelin sheath protects the axon. It not only protects it, but it insulates it and creates and makes the messages go faster. So it shoots down the axon, and then the buttons will, when they receive the message to fire, then they will fire neurotransmitters to other dendrites in other neurons. And these neurotransmitters will swim to the other neurons through a space, a very tiny space called the synapse or the synaptic cleft. I know that's a lot, but let's move on. Okay, so hit pause if you want to read this. It's basically what I just said. Now, another thing that you need to know is if you have a damaged myelin sheath, then there's a disease. It's called multiple sclerosis, MS. If you have a damaged myelin sheath, then you have MS, multiple sclerosis. Okay? So, again, I don't like teaching this because it's a lot of effort for very few questions, but let's do it. How does a neuron fire? It is an electrochemical process. It's electrical inside the neuron, like inside the axon. It's chemical outside the neuron. In the synapse, neurotransmitters are chemicals that swim around. But inside the neuron, it's all electricity. It's positive and negative ions interacting. When a neuron fires, it's called action potential. Okay? Think of potential as like potential energy, like you pull back a rubber band and that gives you potential energy, meaning potential to pop back and hurt somebody. So, action potential is the firing of a neuron, including sodium and potassium. And if you look really closely, you get sodium, which is positive, and calcium, which is negative. I have never seen that on the AP exam, so let's move on. A neuron has what's called an all or none response. It's either going to fire or it's not going to fire. Think of it as like a toilet or gun. A gun is even better. A gun is not going to halfway fire. It's either going to fire or it's not. Okay? There's a lot of information here. But understand that it's electrical inside the neuron, but outside the neuron, in the synapse, it is chemical. Okay? If you want to hit pause and read all of that, go for it. All right. So think of this as a button and think of that as a dendrite. And you can see there's a very small space between the button and the dendrite. And you multiply this by billions and billions, and you get thought and consciousness. These little green balls, think of those as neurotransmitters. All right. So in class, we would take some Play-Doh and create a neuron. And we do that. Okay. All right. I believe this is an AP question, but I deleted one of the answer choices to make space. So hit pause if you want to try this question. Which sentence most closely describes neural transmissions? The answer is C. It's electric inside and it's chemical outside. Okay, that's it. That's the only question I've ever seen on it. That's why I don't want to get too much into it. All right, so here we go. I like this question. It's basic. The function of dendrites is to what? All right, if you want to rewind the video or go back or look at your notes or something. So, boys give, dames receive. The answer is A, to receive information from other neurons. In other words, to receive neurotransmitters from other neurons. Neurotransmitters are like serotonin or dopamine. Okay, the area labeled X in the drawing above denotes which of the following structures? Okay, so look at your notes. Let's just go back and look at the diagram. Okay, so this section right here, we call that the axon terminal. Axon terminal. Okay, so what we have here is this whole section right here. The answer is C, axon terminals. The dendrites look like trees. Remember, dendra is Greek for tree. That other stuff, I don't see that on here. Immediately after firing, a neuron is incapable of responding to stimulation. This condition is referred to as what? I didn't teach you this. Okay, I'm trying not to get into too much detail because a lot of teachers get into way too much detail. But the answer is D. It's called the absolute refractory phase. That term is actually used for male orgasm, where a man has an orgasm and then there's a time when a man cannot have one. That's called the absolute refractory phase. Okay, so a neuron is kind of like the male orgasm in a way, in many ways, really, if you think about it. Okay, so I have this here because I have students draw this on their note card. There's a lot of information here. But you need to understand this. First of all, these black dots, these are neurotransmitters. Okay? And these round things that are storing neurotransmitters, those are called vesicles. Okay? Now, this gap between these neurons, this is a neuron and that's a neuron. It's called the synaptic gap or the synapse. Now, here's some terminology that you need to be aware of. When you see this synapse here and these neurotransmitters swimming around, the top part, which I used to call the terminal button, in this diagram, we call it the presynaptic neuron. Pre meaning before. Before, you see the direction of the nerve impulse? It's coming like top to bottom here. Well, presynaptic means before the synapse. Pre means before. So this terminal button squirts neurotransmitters. And then down here, we call this the postsynaptic neuron, the dendrite of the postsynaptic neuron. So this would be buttons, the terminal button. And down here, you see these receptor sites. These are going to receive neurotransmitters on the dendrite. These are called receptor sites. And what's crazy is that you've got receptor sites for dopamine, you've got receptor sites for cannabinoids, all kinds of things. It's crazily complicated. Okay? So take your time and draw this and write it down. These little things here, those are actually mitochondria. Okay? So hopefully this will be easier and more worth our time. What are neurotransmitters? They are chemical messengers released by terminal buttons through the synapse. So these little dots here, these little dots in here are neurotransmitters. Okay? Examples include dopamine and serotonin. I use those because some of you are familiar with them. You better be. Now, here's another neurotransmitter, and this one actually showed up on the FRQ recently. It's called acetylcholine. Its function is very complicated, but it is involving motor movement and memory. It's like, whoa, those two things have nothing to do with each other. Yeah, I get that. We know it has something to do with memory, and this is why. Because if you look at a patient, if you look at a PET scan of an Alzheimer's patient, you will see problems with acetylcholine. So it says here lack of acetylcholine has been linked to Alzheimer's disease. Okay? Also, acetylcholine is involved in motor movement. So there have actually been poisons that are used to paralyze like birds and stuff in the jungle. And these poisons will block acetylcholine. And so the bird becomes paralyzed and can't move. And then that's when you eat it. So acetylcholine is involved in motor movement, like moving your arms and stuff, and memory. And we're not sure why, but we do know that Alzheimer's is linked with bad acetylcholine. Dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of pleasure, of anticipation. It is the neurotransmitter that you get when you're anticipating something good. That's why gambling is addictive. That's why shopping, video games, sex, drugs are addictive because of dopamine. Now, unfortunately, none of that stuff is on the test. This is what's on the test. If you have too little dopamine, first of all, dopamine is involved in motor movement and alertness. Okay? And I added pleasure, but that's never in the books, unfortunately. So, if dopamine is giving you motor movement, then if you have too little dopamine, then you're going to shake and you're going to have Parkinson's disease. Okay? It's in one symptom of Parkinson's is you're shaking your hands a lot. That's Parkinson's. So if you're low on dopamine, you're going to have the shakes and the tremors. Dopamine is also involved in motor movement and alertness. So this is how I think of it. If you have too much dopamine, then you're going to have schizophrenia. Okay, so if you look at a PET scan of somebody with schizophrenia, you're gonna see problems with the dopamine receptors. Okay, so too little, Parkinson's; too much, schizophrenia. Dopamine is obviously very complicated. So check this out. This is a scan of a brain. This is an advertisement for a medicine that's supposed to help somebody with Parkinson's. So you've got a normal brain, you've got a Parkinson's brain before you take the medicine, and then you've got a Parkinson's brain after you take the medicine. So what this advertisement is showing doctors is that this medicine will help a Parkinson's patient to have normal dopamine. Okay? So, and what type of scan is this? This is a PET scan. This is a PET scan. Serotonin, another very complicated neurotransmitter. Lack of serotonin has been linked to depression and obsessive compulsive type disorders. Okay, so you want proper levels of serotonin. Now, I have read that serotonin acts one way in the stomach and a different way in the brain. So, again, it's very complicated. But if you have OCD, if you have depression, they might give you Prozac to help you deal with those disorders. Okay? Endorphins. Endorphins are designed for pain control. So, how do you get more endorphins? You can eat spicy foods, you can exercise, you can take opioids, but be careful, they're addictive. When you think of opioids, think of heroin and painkillers and stuff like that. Laughing gives you endorphins, getting hugs from people gives you endorphins. So, endorphins are awesome. Now, why does exercise give you endorphins? Because when you get outside and you run and you exercise, your muscles get worn down, and then your body says, oh no, we're getting wear and tear. We better produce endorphins to deal with the pain. Okay? So that's why eating spicy food can get you in a good mood because of the endorphins. Also, maybe because of the adrenaline too. But yeah, endorphins. GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter that chills you out. So if you drink alcohol or take an anti-anxiety medication, it is increasing your GABA levels. Okay. All right, let's try this. Mary participates in an exercise program because she experiences an increase in energy and feelings of well-being at the end of each exercise session. Why is Mary experiencing this? Okay, hit pause, but your answer is E, endorphins. Exercise goes with endorphins. Okay. All right. What are agonists and antagonists? Okay, these are drugs. Agonists, what they do is they mimic or kind of like impersonate neurotransmitters. For example, when you take in nicotine through vaping or cigarettes or tobacco, that is an acetylcholine agonist. So what nicotine does is it acts like acetylcholine, and then it gives you a feeling. I've smoked a cigarette, it didn't make me feel good, so I don't know what that feeling is, but it can give you a head high. Okay? Nicotine is very addicting and I don't recommend it. Okay? My wife is a vapor and that stuff costs so much money and she doesn't enjoy it. Morphine is also an agonist. It is an endorphin agonist. So if you are in the hospital and you're in a lot of pain, they may give you something like morphine because it'll act like endorphins and it will take away your pain. And that is obviously very addictive. Morphine is very addicting. Agonists act like neurotransmitters. Now, antagonists block neurotransmitters. Think of a keyhole and a key. You want to block the key, you stick gum in the keyhole. Antagonists are like sticking gum in the keyhole to keep the key from getting inside. There is a poison called curare, and it is an antagonist for acetylcholine. Now, since acetylcholine deals with muscle movement, then it's going to block your muscle movement and it will paralyze you if you get this poison. So hit pause and check this out. But this is what a normal neurotransmitter looks like. This is an agonist. It's not perfect, but it does the job. An antagonist blocks the neurotransmitter. It's like gum in a keyhole that blocks the key. Read this too, and I'm moving on. All right. You eat some bad Chinese food and feel you are losing control of your muscles. The bacteria you ingested from the food most likely interferes with the use of what? All right, so you're losing control of your muscles. So the answer is acetylcholine. A certain drug reduces the activity of the central nervous system, including the hippocampus and cerebellum. It affects several neurotransmitters, including GABA. All right, so which one of these chills you out? The answer is D, alcohol. By the way, coffee, there is a neurotransmitter called adenosine, and it dilates your blood vessels and lets you be sleepy. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. It blocks adenosine and keeps you from feeling sleepy. Okay. All right, this is important. What is reuptake? It is the mopping up of excess neurotransmitter. So imagine a button that squirts out neurotransmitter. It just squirts it out. And then that same button, after a little while, it'll suck it back up. It'll reabsorb the neurotransmitter. So it squirts it out, and then it like turns on a vacuum and sucks it back up. We call that reuptake. Okay? I usually draw something here that helps, and maybe that's not good for the distance learning. Check this out. Reuptake of a neurotransmitter refers to, all right, it's either A or B. Hit pause. So what squirts out the neurotransmitter? The buttons do. So the reuptake would be the sucking it back up. The answer is B. So this is important. How does Prozac work? Prozac, and you need to know this term, it's an SSRI. SSRI. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So this ad is for a medicine that is like Prozac. It does the same thing. You see these little yellow balls? That's serotonin. And so what you have is, this is the synapse. These are the vesicles. And you see these arrows at the bottom are what I would call the dendrites. No, not the dendrites, sorry. The buttons. The buttons they squirt out the neurotransmitter, and then there's extra neurotransmitters swimming around. Well, after a while, the buttons are going to suck that back up. It's going to suck it back up. Well, the medicine is the X. You see the X? That's what Prozac does. Now, why would it want to block the reuptake? Well, let me tell you why. because it blocks the reuptake, and what's going to happen is that the dendrites are going to eventually absorb that extra neurotransmitter. And then it's going to trick your brain into thinking that you have more serotonin than you actually do. So Prozac tricks your brain into thinking you have more serotonin than you do by blocking the reuptake of serotonin. Cocaine does the same thing. It blocks the reuptake of dopamine. Okay? So what happens is your buttons squirt dopamine, and then your dendrites will absorb a lot of it, but not all of it. So then your buttons want to do reuptake on that dopamine, just suck it back up. But the cocaine gets in the way and blocks that reuptake. So think of the red dots as dopamine. And think of these as receptor sites for dopamine. And eventually these red dots will get absorbed by the receptor sites. And the cocaine is going to help that. So the cocaine makes you think you have more dopamine than you actually do. Okay? Makes me wonder why Alzheimer's patients don't just snort cocaine. Or Parkinson's, Parkinson's. It's just a thought. Okay. All right, let's check this out. In this figure, where do selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors have their initial effect? Ooh, tricky question. Okay, is it A, B, C, or D? Okay, so SSRIs are going to block the reuptake. So where are they going to do it? The answer is C. They're going to do it here. They're going to block it. They're going to block that reuptake. And then eventually the serotonin, these dots here, will be absorbed into the receptor sites. In the figure, where does the neurotransmitter dopamine have its effect? Okay, so where is eventually the dopamine going to have its effect? All right, so let me ask you an easier question. Where will the neurotransmitter get absorbed? The answer is E, the receptor sites for dopamine. And that's when you get the feeling that dopamine gives you. Cocaine blocks the reuptake of which neurotransmitter? The answer is E. By the way, I think ecstasy blocks the reuptake of no, it doesn't. That's serotonin. Ecstasy involves serotonin. Okay. All right, check this out. Oh boy. Which letter indicates the synaptic cleft? Okay, so remember the synapse is the gap. Also, which letter indicates the postsynaptic membrane? Oh boy. Okay. So the synapse is D. Okay, it's the gap between. So which is the postsynaptic? So if you had an arrow here, which you probably deserve, coming from this direction, then post means after. So after the neurotransmitter crosses the synapse, then you get all this down here. This down here, all of this down here is the postsynaptic membrane. Okay. All right, let's move on. All right, I don't want to get too much into this. I've only seen this like once ever, the types of neurons. You've got sensory neurons, also called afferent neurons. Sensory neurons take information from the senses, like, ow, my arm, to the brain. Like I just kicked my toe. And so the afferent neurons are going to take that message to my brain or to my spine. Okay? So afferent neurons take it away. A is for away. How about that? Away from the pain to the brain. Motor neurons, called afferent neurons, they take information from the brain to the rest of the body. So if I tell my right leg to move, I'm using my afferent neurons. I honestly don't even have this memorized, I'll be honest with you. And interneurons are the neurons in between that go between neurons. Okay. I've only seen these once, and I'll show you the question that I have. And here we go. Information is relayed to the spinal cord or to the brain by what? All right. When I made this, I actually had to go back and look at the slide, but the answer is A. This is the only time I've ever seen this on the AP exam. So afferent takes it to the brain or to the spinal cord, away from the pain or away from the sensation. All right, there's a lot of really good information on here. Nothing hard, thank God, but I always have students put this whole thing on a note card. So let's talk about how the nervous system is organized. First of all, you have the CNS, the central nervous system. The central nervous system is indicated in orange right here. The central nervous system is everything inside bone, your brain and your spine. Everything that is outside of your skull and your spine, outside of that, is called the peripheral. Think about what peripheral means. The peripheral nervous system is outside the skull and outside the spine. Now, the peripheral nervous system, you don't really need to know how this is organized, but you do need to know what these four words mean. But you don't really need to know how it's organized. So you could even make a separate note card for these. You've got your autonomic nervous system. Think about your autonomic as being autonomous. Autonomous means it happens without any actual effort. Okay? Like, for example, hold on a second. I want to make my kidney work. All right, now I'm back. You see that? That's ridiculous. I don't need to tell my kidney to work. My kidney works autonomously. It happens automatically. That's another way of thinking about autonomic, automatically or autonomously. And then you have somatic. Now, remember earlier I told you soma means body? Well, here we go again with soma. Somatic is your voluntary movements of your skeletal muscles. So if you snap your fingers, you're using your somatic nervous system. Or if you're walking, you're using your somatic nervous system. Now, let's go back to autonomic. And this is very commonly tested, so be aware. You've got your sympathetic nervous system, and then you've got your parasympathetic nervous system. So let me explain the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic. It's easy and it's always tested. So this is good use of our time. By the way, this is your central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord. That's your CNS. Now, your sympathetic nervous system is what hypes you up. It's your fight or flight system. It involves E activities like emergency, excitement, exercise, and embarrassment. So if your crush tells you that she wants to be just friends, you get heartbroken, your adrenaline pumps, that's your sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate increases, your breathing increases, your pupils dilate, meaning they get bigger so you can see better. Your bronchioles dilate so you can breathe better. your skin gets cold and sweaty, you get nervous, or you see something scary like this dog, you see this something like this and you get scared, that's your sympathetic nervous system. Yeah, you're a good boy. Now, your sympathetic hypes you up. So what about the dog goes away for a long time and then your body goes back to normal? Your body goes back to homeostasis. We call that the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, parasympathetic, one way to think about it is think of like a parachute. A parachute slows you down. Okay. Now, if you speak Spanish, think of the word para. Okay. Para. Either way, parasympathetic means to bring you back to homeostasis, bring you back to normal. Homeostasis is on the test. It means brings you back to normal. Homeo means same. Think about it as same state. So it brings you back to your normal heart rate, your normal body temperature. You know, that's what we mean by homeostasis. Your parasympathetic brings you back to normal. It slows you down. So sympathetic hypes you up, parasympathetic brings you back to normal, slows you down. So if you see a snake, that's your sympathetic, but your parasympathetic will bring you back down to normal. Hit pause and take a look at this. Look at this. Your sympathetic nervous system arouses you, dilates pupils, accelerates heartbeat. Your stomach stops digesting food. That's why you don't usually get hungry in the middle of a crisis. You might even pee your pants. It relaxes your bladder. Okay, you might even pee your pants. Your parasympathetic nervous system brings you back to normal. Your pupils go back to normal. Your heartbeat slows down, goes back to normal. Your digestion goes back to normal. Okay. All right. Which of the following is reduced during fight or flight reaction? Okay. So which one of these goes down during fight or flight? So you're running away from a tiger. Which one of these goes down? The answer is E, digestion. Jose was enjoying a walk in the woods on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. As he went around a curve, he noticed a bear walking toward him. Immediately, his pupils dilated, he began to perspire, sweat, and his heart accelerated. These changes are most closely related to the function of the what? Okay? The answer is sympathetic. Sympathetic hypes you up. Parasympathetic brings you back to normal, back to homeostasis. Nervousness can result in faster and more shallow breathing, as well as a racing heart. This is due to the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic hypes you up. All right. One thing I want you to know, and I probably should have talked about this earlier, but let's say you burn yourself cooking, and once that burn hits your fingers, you pull back. Now, when you hurt yourself really bad, your spine gets the information more quickly than your brain because your spine works faster. That's called a spinal reflex. Okay? So it kind of just skips the brain and you jerk back before you can even process the thought. That way you don't damage your skin so much. So look at this. So you get pain, and then the green ends up being the afferent neuron is sending the message to the spine, and then your spine is using the efferent neuron to pull it back. Again, I don't have afferent and efferent memorized yet. All right, hit pause and check this out. A spinal reflex differs from a normal sensory and motor reaction in that what? Okay, hit pause. The answer is B. All right, moving right along. Activation of the parasympathetic nervous system results in which of the following? Okay, so parasympathetic nervous system, we're calming down. And the answer is E, because your heart is slowing down. It was hyped up because of the danger. Now it's slowing back down. All right, we're almost done. The endocrine system, controlled by your hypothalamus. The endocrine system are your glands and your hormones. Now, what is a hormone? A hormone is a chemical that is in your blood. Neurotransmitters are in your nerves. Hormones are in your blood. Hormones work more slowly than neurotransmitters. So think of a hormone. How about adrenaline? Adrenaline works fast, but neurotransmitters are even faster. And for every hormone, there is a gland. For example, think about the testes. The testicles create testosterone. The ovaries create estrogen and progesterone. Pancreas create insulin. Adrenal glands create adrenaline. And all of this is controlled by the hypothalamus. Okay? So look at this question. The diagram to the right depicts the human body's what? And the answer is E. That's your endocrine system. Glands, endocrine system. And that's it. So if you combine the brain with the nervous system, you get somewhere between 8 and 10% of the multiple choice. Okay? All right. That's it for